Hi, this is Kris McGregor. Lent is a spiritual journey, a call to return to God with our whole heart. This Ash Wednesday, Discerning Hearts invites you to walk this sacred path with us in our brand new daily series, From Ashes to Glory, a Lenten spiritual journey with Discerning Hearts. Each day will offer scripture, reflections from the saints and desert fathers, and guided prayer to deepen your relationship with Christ. Whether you're at home, in your car, or on a quiet retreat, take this time to embrace God's invitation to deeper union with Him. Join us starting this Ash Wednesday, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's journey together from ashes to glory. DiscerningHearts.com presents Saint Therese and Marie, the story of two cousins with Father Timothy Gallagher. Father Gallagher is a member of the Oblates of the Virgin Mary, a religious community dedicated to retreats and spiritual formation, according to the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. Father Gallagher is featured on several series on the EWTN television network, including Living the Discerning Life. He's the author of numerous books on the teachings of St. Ignatius of Loyola, as well as on the teachings of Venerable Bruno Lanteri, founder of the Oblates of the Virgin Mary. St. Therese and Marie, the story of two cousins with Father Timothy Gallagher. I'm your host, Kris McGregor. Welcome back, Father Gallagher.
I'm always happy to be here.
I'm, again, so thrilled that we are getting an opportunity to explore more the incredible depths of grace that was provided to us by, or should I say through, Saint Therese. We've been discussing her relationship and her counsel to her cousin Marie. But in that, we've touched on so many other members of the family once again. They're so unified in connection in so many ways, aren't they?
Very much so. And it's one of the things that Therese says, that she loves saints who love their family very much. We'll see that in just a minute here. Yeah, this is the story of a family, so that when you enter into Therese and her relationships, you're quickly brought into these two families. Well, we have reached the point of Therese's final illness, and again, in the interest of not going too long on things, I'm going to move now to the actual day of her death, which is September 30th of 1897, when Therese is just 24. And we have a description of this day written down by her sister Pauline. I guess I'm sometimes calling her Pauline to identify her as Therese's sister. In Carmel, she is Mother Agnes of Jesus or Sister Agnes of Jesus, depending on whether she's prioress or before then. But this is her description of that day, and let's just read through it. September 30th, Thursday, the day of her holy death. In the morning, I was with her during the Mass, and this is the way the prioress allowed things to happen, that during the hours in the course of the day, when the community needed to be in the choir chanting the office or for the celebration of Mass, the way that Therese was accompanied was that Pauline was given permission to be with her. So she spends a good deal, that's maybe 4.5 hours a day during those times, and that's why Pauline is with her when the community is at Mass. In the morning, I was with her during the Mass. She didn't speak a word to me. She was exhausted, gasping for breath. Her sufferings, I thought, were indescribable. One moment she joined her hands and looked at the statue of the Blessed Virgin. Now, as I read these words, I'm looking at a photo of that infirmary where Therese is situated at this point. And what the sisters have done is to move the bed in such a direction that it faces the wall, where there's a stand about halfway up the wall on which to place a statue. And they've brought down the statue of the Virgin of the Smile. You remember that whole episode of Therese's serious illness when she's 9 and the healing through the Virgin of the Smile. When Celine entered the Carmel, she brought that statue with her. So that's the statue that Therese, all she has to do is lift up her eyes, and right in front of her on the opposite wall is that statue. At one moment she joined her hands and looked at the statue of the Blessed Virgin. Oh, I prayed fervently to her, but it's the agony, really, without any mixture of consolation. And we need to keep in mind that this is not only extreme physical suffering, but also the utter darkness of faith that will not be lifted until the very last moment. And even as she goes through this day, she is experiencing both kinds of suffering. And that's what she means by saying, without any mixture of consolation. This is Pauline, I spoke a few words of sympathy and affection, and I added that she had edified me very much through all her illness. And then Therese responds, this is exquisitely Therese, just hours away from her death, in extreme pain. And look how she replies, and you, the consolations you've given me, they are very great. It's always other-centered. And again, you just touch the depths of the little way. That's, if you want, a little thing, but it's not a little thing in the love at that moment, in those circumstances. All throughout the day, without a moment's respite, she remained, we can say, without any exaggeration, in veritable torments. She appeared to be at the end of her strength, and nevertheless, to our great surprise, she was able to move, to sit up in her bed, and that they never expected that she'd have the energy for that. And Therese says, you see the strength that I have today. No, I'm not going to die. I still have strength for months, perhaps years, because as we've said before, she's young. She's not a person in her last years of a long life undergoing this illness. She's 24 years old, and she's been at death's door at various points through these preceding roughly 6 months, and then recovered. And that's the thought. The terrible pain, maybe it's not going to lead to my death. Maybe I'm going to look at me. I have the energy to sit up here. And maybe this is going to go on for months yet, like this. And the prioress is there, Mother Marie de Gonzague, and she says, and if God willed it, that is, that this would go on even for months more like this, years maybe, would you accept it? And Therese struggles to answer, and again, this is pure Therese. She began to answer in her agony, it would really have to be, and then she breaks off. But checking herself immediately, she said with a tone of sublime resignation, falling back on her pillows, I really will it. If that's what you want, Lord, months, maybe years more of this, it's awfully hard for me to say this. I hesitated, but yes, I really will it. I was able to gather these exclamations, but it is impossible to express the tone in which they were said. Therese again, I no longer believe in death for me. I believe only in suffering. The suffering is so intense and so all-encompassing that that's the only reality right now. Death is not even in the picture. All there is moment by moment what she's enduring. And then, after a pause, well, so much the better, again, accepting what God is asking of her. Exclamations follow, oh my God, I love God. O good blessed Virgin, come to my aid. You know, Therese, who is so other-centered and prays for others, she's praying for herself now, and we'll see her ask others to pray for her in the extremity of her suffering. If this is the agony, what is death? If this can be so painful, what will death be like? Ah, my God, yes, he is very good. I find him very good. Again, those endless acts of faith in the darkness and the pain. Looking at the statue of the Blessed Virgin and saying to her in the statue, oh, you know I'm suffocating. Because at this point, Therese has lost her right lung completely and half of her left lung as the tuberculosis is consuming the pulmonary tissue. I think maybe one way to get just an insight into this, if we've ever had a moment when, let's say, we've run into something suddenly or fallen down suddenly and the breath is knocked out of us and we struggle to breathe, that's what's going on constantly for her here. God is going to, so this is probably either Pauline or the prioress. God is going to aid you, poor little one. It will soon be all over. Yes, but when? My God, have pity on your poor little child. Have pity on her. Then she turns to the prioress. O Mother, I assure you, the chalice is filled to the brim. But God is not going to abandon me, I'm sure. Now, this is not constant. One thing said after another. There's a struggle to breathe between these. And Pauline represents this by giving the trailing off points at the end of each of these lines. He has never abandoned me. Yes, my God, everything that you will. So yes, but have pity on me. I'm at the extremity of what I can bear. Little sisters, pray for me. My God, you who are so good. Oh yes, you are good, I know it. Again, acts of faith. Now we reach the afternoon of this day. After Vespers, Mother Prioress placed a picture of Our Lady of Mount Carmel on her knees. She looked at it for a moment and said, when Mother Prioress assured her she'd soon be caressing the Blessed Virgin and the child Jesus, "O Mother, present me quickly to the Blessed Virgin. I'm a baby who can't stand any more. Prepare me for death." And the Mother Prioress responds in a beautiful way here. Mother Prioress told her that since she had always understood humility, her preparations were already made. She, Therese, reflected a moment and spoke these words humbly. And this is absolutely beautiful, and this is often quoted, and this is the context of it. Yes, it seems to me I never sought anything but the truth. That's so deep in Therese. We'll return to it briefly later. Yes, I have understood humility of heart. It seems to me I'm humble. She's at a point now where she doesn't need to hide anything. She repeated once more, all I wrote about my desires for suffering, oh, it's true just the same. Even when it's this hard, I still yes to all that I've said about it. And I am not sorry for delivering myself up to love. There's her offering to merciful love as a victim. With insistence, oh no, I'm not sorry, on the contrary. A little later, never would I have believed it was possible to suffer so much. And I'll repeat again that she didn't receive a single injection of morphine. Morphine had been produced as a commercial product maybe just a few decades before this, and doctors were now prescribing it for pain. Just one personal memory, it was years ago. I don't know if they still use morphine for this, but they were using it then. And I'd had a surgery, and when I woke up from it, was feeling probably about as miserable as I've ever felt. And they gave me morphine, and I remember it just took all the pain away, But none of this is given to Therese for the reasons that we've described. And I want to say, I didn't say it last time, but in fairness to the prioress, who just didn't think it was right for sisters to be receiving sedatives like this, years later, when her own death approached of cancer and it was very painful, she also refused it until the sisters insisted so strongly with her that she gave in. And she recognized at that point that it would have been better to have allowed Therese to have had the morphine at that time, but there's no mitigation of the sufferings here. Oh, never would I have believed it was possible to suffer so much. Never, never. And then this next line it's really at the heart of her whole mission. I cannot explain this, that is, the intensity of the suffering I'm undergoing. I cannot explain this except by the ardent desires I have had to save souls. That's the only way I can make sense out of this, because my suffering will win souls to God. Now look at what's happened, since, and how many souls have been won to the Lord through her. But that's the way she understands the suffering. And in a sense, it's like Jesus on the cross. Intensity of suffering, and it is for the salvation of souls. We reach 5 o'clock. She has a little over 2 hours to live at this point. Toward 5 o'clock, I was alone by her side. Her face changed all of a sudden. I understood it was her last agony. When the community entered the infirmary, she welcomed all the sisters with a sweet smile. She was holding her crucifix and looking at it constantly. And then Pauline goes on to describe the symptoms of the last agony, which were really painful. Her difficulties in breathing were always increasing, and in order to breathe, she made little involuntary cries. At one moment, her mouth seemed to be so dry that Sister Genevieve, that's Celine, thinking to relieve her, placed on her lips a little piece of ice. She accepted it, giving her a smile which I'll never forget. It was like a last farewell. At 6 o'clock, when the Angelus was ringing, she looked at the statue of the Blessed Virgin for a long time. Finally, at a few minutes after 7, Mother Prioress dismissed the community, and she sees, all right, that must mean that we don't expect you to die very shortly. And she sighed, Mother, isn't this the agony? Am I not going to die? Yes, my poor little one, it's the agony, but God perhaps wills to prolong it for several hours. She answered with courage, well, and there's a pause there. All right, with an exclamation point, again a pause. All right, exclamation point. Oh, I would not want to suffer for a shorter time. And looking at her crucifix, she says, oh, I love him. My God, I love you. And those are her final words. Suddenly, after having pronounced these words, she fell back, her head leaning to the right. Mother Prioress had the infirmary bell rung very quickly to call back the community. Open all the doors, she said at the same time. Now, there are 3 doors to this infirmary, and she wants all of them open, but as you'll see, the words of the prioress have a deep meaning for Pauline. These words had something solemn about them, and made me think that in heaven God was saying them also to his angels. The sisters had time to kneel down around her bed, and they were witnesses to the ecstasy of the little dying saint. And here's this powerful final moment. As we'll see, the sisters say it lasts about the length of time it takes to say a creed, the credo. Minute and a half, whatever that would be. Her face had regained the lily-white complexion it always had in full health. Her eyes were fixed above, brilliant with peace and joy. She made certain beautiful movements with her head, and here Pauline gives an interpretation to them, as though someone had divinely wounded her with an arrow of love, then had withdrawn the arrow to wound her again. And Marie comes forward at this point, that is, Marie Guerin. Sister Marie of the Eucharist approached with a candle to get a closer view of that sublime look. In the light of the candle, there didn't appear any movement in her eyelids. This ecstasy lasted almost the space of a credo, and then she gave her last breath. After her death, she had a heavenly smile. She was ravishingly beautiful, and you see that we have a photo that Celine took. And she takes a later photo when Therese is prepared, for the viewing and the mass and the rest. And she already looks different then. But here, they all remark on it, just the beauty that they see in her. After her death, she had a heavenly smile. She was ravishingly beautiful. She was holding her crucifix so tightly that we had to force it from her hands to prepare her for burial. Sister Marie of the Sacred Heart, that's her oldest sister, and I performed this office along with Sister Aimée of Jesus. And we noticed she didn't seem any more than 12 or 13 years old. Her limbs were supple right up to her burial on Monday, October 4th. Now, I'm not even going to try to comment any further on any of that. What I will do is read just a few things about this. And this is that same day after Therese's death, and Pauline, Mother Agnes, sends this brief note to Isidore and Celine and Léonie, who has returned from the visitation and is with them. And she says the following: Dear Aunt and Uncle, dear Léonie, our angel is in heaven. She gave up her last sigh at 7 o'clock, pressing her crucifix to her heart and saying, Oh, I love you. She had just lifted her eyes to heaven. And then Pauline says, what was she seeing? With an exclamation point. Your little girl who loves you more than ever, Sister Agnes of Jesus. I want to quote from 2 authors. The first is Monsignor André Combe, who was one of the early great scholars of Therese. And we'll see both of them say the same thing about the mystery of Therese, the fascination and the mystery. So this man who has studied, if you can say that, Therese so deeply, Remarkably, 50 years later, on September 30th, so that would be 1947, the 50th anniversary of Therese's death, he preached at the Carmel, and Pauline and Celine were both still living and were present, as they did this. But he says this: "The soul of Therese is an abyss which I cannot claim after years of research to have plumbed." Bishop Guy Gaucher, toward the end of this lovely book which he's written on the Passion of Therese, chronicling these final 6 months of her life, writes the following: "Having finished the portrait sketch of Therese at the gates of death, we will not attempt any synthesis. We admit our limitations without any regret. Rather, there is a certain sense of joy that comes from feeling oneself overwhelmed by the inexpressible reality, namely the truth, the simplicity, the transparency of a human life where deception had no part." So this is the final act, if we can say that, of the story of the two cousins in life. But of course, in the communion of saints, that story is never ended and it's still ongoing. But I want to look now and just briefly at the years that follow in Marie's life. So she makes her final profession in the same year that Therese dies, so this is in 1897, and Marie is 27 years at that time. 2 years later, by the year 1899, Marie begins to fall ill in such measure that she's no longer able to fully observe the rule of the Carmel. So she's 29 years old when this happens. In that same year, 1899, she makes a retreat, and I want to quote just a few lines from this. She's writing to her father, Isidore, about her retreat. It would take us too long to go through because there are many letters that she's written in these years to go through them, but what you watch is a maturing. Therese's death seems to have breathed grace on all the actors in this story. She promises that she'll spend her heaven doing good on earth. You see it in almost the first instance here. And you watch, Marie is still Marie, and she has her struggles, but you watch a very rich maturation go on in these years. And in the letter, she says to her father, "Mother asked about the details of the retreat that I've just made." So she says she's going to say a little bit about it in this letter to her father. "And what is most beautiful, because it was a very grace-filled retreat for her, what is most beautiful is the transformation that Jesus wrought in my soul during this retreat, a transformation which it seems is translated externally. I am often told," so the other sisters, as they see Marie after her retreat, "I am often told, this is not possible. You come back from heaven, that is your days of retreat, you breathe peace and love. This is the Marie who was so tormented in her scruples, not so much earlier in her life. It made me happy because I feel that the peace that floods my heart must be reflected in my face. I don't recognize myself, but this is pure grace of the good Lord because I make no effort for it. Please help me, my dear little father, to thank the good God for so many graces." And here's Therese. "It is certain that since the death of our little saint," so it's 2 years earlier, "I no longer feel the same, and I am not the only one to notice it. It's amazing how much she loved and still loves my soul." In that same year, 1899, again, Marie is 29 years old. Her mother, Celine, begins to fail physically. She's always had frail health, but things take a turn. Her illness increases in the course of this year, and she's weakening. And in early 1900, Marie is now 30, and her mother is 52 in this year, 1899. At the beginning of the next year, she contracts a pretty severe influenza, and this, in conjunction with the already weak state of her physical health, is too much for her, and she succumbs. And so she dies on February 13th, 1900. So 3 years after Therese. She is the first in these two families to die after Therese. And I have just a note here from the priest who knew the family very well. He was the pastor of the parish of Saint Pierre, so he knew these families well. And he comes to administer the last anointing, and afterwards said the following: "In the 25 years that I have been a priest, I have never seen anyone receive the last sacraments with so angelic a piety." And in fact, in these final years of her life, actually in the years since she and Isidore made the sacrifice of Marie to the Carmel, Celine, her mother, whose spiritual life was already pretty substantial at this point, she grows. And again, you could go on the Carmel website and read her letters, and you'd see the spirit of faith that fulfills them. Now, understandably, this is extremely, extremely painful for Isidore, her husband, and for Marie and Jean as well. Their faith sustains them, but just humanly, because of the intense, deep bonds of love in this family, it's deeply painful. And I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs from a letter that Marie writes her father on the day of her mother's death. "My beloved little father, so my dear little mother has left for heaven. Oh, my darling little father, how can I tell you my pain and also my peace? No, death for me is not a separation. It is a reunion, since now I can speak intimately at any time with the one I loved so tenderly, and for the love of Jesus I had left." There's a beautiful thought there. Probably all of us have had this experience. It's living the communion of saints, so that, let's say, a person who is dear to us is very much ill, and we know doesn't have too much time left. And if it's possible, in terms of physical proximity, we can go and spend time with that person. But once the person does pass away and enters into the next life, now we can have access to that person at any time. It's something that I'll just say personally, I find very comforting. In the last year, 2 priests who have been instrumental in my life have passed away, and I miss them, but it's also lovely now to be able to speak to them in the communion of the saints and to ask their prayers.
Because it's so interesting around that time. I know that for Leonie, entering into the visitation, her last attempt, her final attempt, her successful attempt, was done in January of 1899. So there's a lot going on in the life of this family. Can't imagine, with all these lights beginning to shine even brighter in heaven, the intercession that they continue to work in each other's lives and for each other to accomplish incredible miracles and obtain tremendous amount of graces.
What comes to mind as you're saying that, I can't remember which of these persons it is who writes this. It might be Pauline, who says that with every death that takes place, the numbers of those to whom we can turn grows. The size of the family in heaven is growing. And of course, then the longing to be there with them, all of that is growing as one death will follow another. And Marie's mother, Celine, is the first to follow Therese. Of course, there have been many deaths before this of the Martin children, the 4 of them who died young, Louis and Celine, and all of that we've seen in other circumstances.
But this has been a core that has been together for over a decade or more now. This family that formed after the death of Zélie and then even Louis.
Yes, it's, again, for reasons of time, but it's all there if you go on the website of the Carmel of Lisieux and just read some of the letters between these family members, and what you see is the intensity of the love that's there. Maybe expressed more ardently by Marie Guerin, than anyone else because of the ardor of her heart. I quoted somewhere earlier how she'll say at the end of her letters, let's say to her father, "I eat you with kisses, je vous mange, I eat you with kisses." And as I said earlier, it's Therese who likes saints who love their families very much. Clearly, in this sphere of sanctity, love of family is not only a hindrance to sanctity, but the more one grows in holiness, the stronger that love becomes. You'll see Marie will say that repeatedly in her letters. Even Therese says that too, that people think that when you enter a cloister, your love for your family and your bond with your family is going to diminish or weaken. They don't realize that it's exactly the contrary, because your love is so purified and so centered on Jesus that your ability to love grows. And the love for your family members grows ever deeper. And you'll see them say things like this, I don't know how much longer this can go on. My heart can only bear so much, but I know that my love for you is growing. Yes, that's very deep in all of this, which is precisely why the death is so painful, mitigated by faith and the hope of eternal reunion, but still humanly very painful for them.
You've been listening to Saint Therese and Marie, the story of two cousins, with Father Timothy Gallagher. Be sure to check out the comprehensive summary and reflection questions contained in the show notes for this episode. To download this particular episode, along with hundreds of other spiritual formation programs, visit discerninghearts.com, or you can find them within the free Discerning Hearts app or wherever you download your favorite podcasts. This has been a production of Discerning Hearts. I'm your host, Kris McGregor. We hope that if this has been helpful for you, that you will first pray for our mission, which is to offer authentic and rock-solid spiritual formation freely to souls around the world. And if you feel us worthy, please consider a charitable donation, which is fully tax-deductible, to help support our efforts. But most of all, we hope that you will tell a friend about discerninghearts.com and join us next time for Saint Therese and Marie, the story of two cousins, with Father Timothy Gallagher.